What if the person you despised most in the world turned out to be the one person who truly understood you? What if your own brilliant mind, the very thing you were most proud of, was the thing blinding you to the truth? 200 years ago, a woman with no legal right to inherit her family's home, no career, no vote, and no social power, wrote a novel so devastatingly smart, so emotionally sharp, so perfectly observed about human nature, that the world is still reading it today. That woman was Jane Austen, and that novel is Pride and Prejudice. Today, we're not just going to summarize a classic. We're going to walk you through one of the greatest love stories ever written and reveal something surprising. This isn't really a romance. It's a story about the war between your ego and your heart. It's a story about how the stories we tell ourselves about other people can be completely, catastrophically wrong. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover why Elizabeth Bennet is one of the most beloved heroines in all of literature. You'll feel the electricity of two brilliant people who can't stand each other until they can't live without each other. And you'll walk away with lessons about pride, prejudice, money, marriage, and self-knowledge that are just as sharp today as they were in 1813. Comment below. Have you ever completely misjudged someone, only to realize you were totally wrong about them? Because this story is for you. Stay with us. This is going to be worth it. Section 1. The World of the Bennets. Where everything begins, picture a small country village in England, around the year 1811. There are no cars, no phones, no offices where women can build careers. For a woman of the gentry class, life has exactly one socially acceptable destination: marriage. Into this world we meet the Bennet family. There's Mr. Bennet, witty, sardonic, and deeply checked out from the chaos of his own household. There's Mrs. Bennet, a woman of nervous energy and very little else, whose singular obsession is getting her 5 daughters married off before the family estate is inherited by a distant male cousin. And then there are the 5 daughters themselves, the beautiful and gentle Jane, the brilliant and spirited Elizabeth, our heroine, the bookish Mary, and the wild, giggly younger 2, Kitty and Lydia. The novel opens with one of the most famous lines in all of literature. Jane Austen writes, "It is a truth, universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Now here's what's brilliant about that sentence. Austen isn't agreeing with it, she's satirizing it. She's holding up a mirror to her society and letting it laugh at itself. Because the real truth is this: every single woman in this world is in desperate want of a wealthy husband. Not by choice, but because the law gives them almost no other option. The Bennet girls will inherit almost nothing when their father dies. The family estate passes to a male cousin by law, and their mother's portion, divided 5 ways, would barely pay the rent on a modest apartment. So when news arrives that a handsome, wealthy young man named Mr. Bingley has moved into nearby Netherfield Park, Mrs. Bennet is ecstatic. The hunt begins. Pause and think about this. The pressure these women were under was extraordinary. Marriage wasn't just romance, it was survival. Section 2. The Assembly Ball. First impressions are everything and nothing. And this is where it begins. The local assembly ball. Everyone is dressed up, the music is playing, and Mr. Bingley arrives. Charming, handsome, easy-natured, and immediately, completely, falls for Jane Bennet, the eldest and most beautiful of the sisters. But Bingley didn't come alone. He brought his friend, Fitzwilliam Darcy. Mr. Darcy enters the room like a thundercloud, tall, impossibly handsome, with an annual income of £10,000, twice Bingley's, and an air of such overwhelming pride that the entire room turns against him within 5 minutes. He barely dances, he barely speaks. He surveys the assembled locals, like a man inspecting furniture he has no intention of buying. And then, fatally, he says something about Elizabeth Bennet. He says she is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt him. Elizabeth overhears. Now another woman might have been devastated. But Elizabeth Bennet, she laughs. She finds it funny. She goes home and imitates him for the amusement of her family. And in that moment, in that gap between hurt pride and humor, you see exactly who Elizabeth is. She is exceptional, but she has also just formed an opinion of Mr. Darcy, a very, very firm opinion. And as we'll see, that opinion will shape everything that follows. Section 3. 2 people who could not be more different or more alike. Let's talk about the title, Pride and Prejudice. When Austen first wrote this novel, she called it First Impressions, but the final title cuts right to the heart of the matter. Pride, that's Darcy. He was born into wealth and status, raised to believe that most people are beneath him. His pride is real, and in some ways, justified. He is one of the most respected men in England, but it makes him arrogant. It makes him dismissive, and it will cost him everything. Prejudice. That's Elizabeth. She is sharp, perceptive, brilliant at reading people, or so she believes. When Darcy wounds her at that first ball, she forms a prejudice against him that feels completely reasonable. She sees every subsequent interaction through that lens. But here's the twist that makes this novel genius. Both characters are guilty of both flaws. Darcy is prejudiced against Elizabeth's lower social standing. Elizabeth is prideful about her own ability to judge character. They are mirrors of each other, and they don't know it yet. Have you ever realized you were more similar to someone you disliked than you wanted to admit? Comment below. I think this hits closer to home for most of us than we'd like to admit. Section 4. Jane and Bingley. The love story that almost wasn't. While Elizabeth is sparring with Darcy in her mind, something genuinely lovely is happening between her sister Jane and Mr. Bingley. Bingley is everything Darcy isn't socially: warm, open, enthusiastic, and he is enchanted by Jane. Jane, in turn, falls quietly, deeply in love, but Jane is too gentle to show it. She keeps her emotions so contained, so perfectly composed, that Darcy, who watches closely, concludes she probably isn't that interested in Bingley after all. And Darcy, protective of his friend, quietly intervenes. He arranges for Bingley to move away from the neighborhood, effectively ending a romance that could have made both people profoundly happy. He does this thinking he's doing the right thing, protecting his friend from a woman who doesn't love him. He is wrong. He is so terribly wrong. And this single act of well-intentioned interference will carry devastating consequences, not just for Jane and Bingley, but for Darcy himself. Section 5. The villain of the piece. Wickham's dangerous charm. Every great story needs a villain, and Pride and Prejudice gives us one of literature's most brilliant ones, because he doesn't look like a villain at all. George Wickham is handsome, charming, a military officer who can talk to anyone, make anyone laugh, make any woman feel seen and special. When he meets Elizabeth, the chemistry is immediate and electric, and Wickham has a story to tell, a story about Mr. Darcy. He tells Elizabeth that he grew up on Darcy's estate, that Darcy's father loved him like a son and left him a generous provision in his will, and that the current Mr. Darcy, proud, cold, jealous, denied him that inheritance out of spite and contempt. Elizabeth listens, and every feeling she already has about Darcy, the contempt, the dislike, the suspicion, calcifies into absolute conviction. Darcy is the villain. Wickham is the victim. She is sure of it. She has never been more wrong in her life. But here's what's so uncomfortable about this moment. Her reasoning was sound. She had evidence. Wickham was plausible. Darcy did behave coldly. Her mistake wasn't stupidity. It was confirmation bias. She believed Wickham because she wanted to believe him, and that is a very human mistake indeed. Section 6. Mr. Collins. The proposal no one wanted. Now we need to talk about Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is a clergyman. He is also, as Elizabeth's father observes with barely disguised delight, one of the most pompous, self-important, oblivious men who ever drew breath. He arrives at the Bennet house on an important mission: to choose a wife from among his cousins, thereby partially making amends for the fact that he will one day inherit their home due to the entail. He is not doing this out of love. He's doing it out of a checklist. He is also doing it because his patroness, the formidable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, has advised him to marry. He settles on Elizabeth. Elizabeth refuses him. Mr. Collins is stunned. Not hurt, stunned. He cannot conceive that any woman would refuse him. He tells Elizabeth, essentially, that she is being irrational and will change her mind. He is quite certain that no woman with Elizabeth's financial situation could afford to refuse a man with his prospects. And here is the devastating part. He's not entirely wrong. Elizabeth's refusal is an act of extraordinary courage. She is choosing the possibility of happiness, or nothing, over the certainty of security. Most women in her position would have said yes. Mrs. Bennet is furious. Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's best friend, quietly accepts Mr. Collins's proposal the very next day, with clear eyes and no illusions about love. "I am not romantic," Charlotte tells Elizabeth. "I never was. I ask only a comfortable home. It's not a happy ending, but it's a realistic one. And Austen asks us to hold both truths at once. Charlotte is practical. Charlotte is also settling. Both things are true. Would you make the choice Elizabeth made, or Charlotte's? Comment below. I genuinely want to know your thoughts. Section 7. Visiting Rosings. Lady Catherine's kingdom Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her new home, the parsonage attached to the grand estate of Rosings Park, home of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Lady Catherine is everything Darcy is not. Loud about her superiority rather than quiet about it. She dispenses opinions on everything from the correct management of a household to the number of daughters a woman ought to present in society. She is accustomed to total, unchallenged deference. Then she meets Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who thinks Lady Catherine is rather absurd and is completely unbothered by her rank. And then, unexpectedly, Darcy arrives at Rosings to visit his aunt. He and Elizabeth are in the same small social circle. They walk together. They argue. The tension between them is electric and confusing, and neither of them knows what to do with it. But something is shifting in Darcy. Something is changing. He is beginning to see Elizabeth not as a woman beneath his notice, but as the most fascinating, most alive, most challenging person he has ever met in his carefully ordered, stubbornly proud life. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Section 8. The First Proposal. The most disastrous declaration of love in literature. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth. It should be a triumphant scene. A wealthy, powerful, highly sought-after man declares his love for a woman of modest means. By every social calculation of the time, this should be her dream come true. Instead, it is a catastrophe, because Darcy, unable to stop himself from being Darcy, tells Elizabeth, while proposing, that he loves her despite every reason he has not to, despite her family's lack of fortune, despite the embarrassing behavior of her mother, despite her sisters. Despite it all, he loves her. Elizabeth listens, and her answer is swift and devastating. She tells him no. She tells him that his pride, his arrogance, his complete disregard for the feelings of others, including separating Bingley from Jane, which she now knows about, have made it impossible for her to accept him. She tells him he has behaved in no way like a gentleman. Darcy is shattered and furious. "Had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner," Elizabeth says, "those words will haunt him for months." This is one of the most powerful moments in the entire novel, and it's not the love scene. It's the rejection, because it's the rejection that changes everything. Section 9. The Letter. When the truth comes out, the next morning, Darcy gives Elizabeth a letter, not a love letter, an explanation. He tells her the truth about Wickham. That far from being cheated, Wickham was given his inheritance, spent it, demanded more, was refused, and then attempted to elope with Darcy's 16-year-old sister, Georgiana, to get his hands on her fortune. He tells her about Jane and Bingley, that he truly believed Jane didn't love Bingley, and that he now acknowledges he may have been wrong. He doesn't apologize for his pride, but he explains himself, and he trusts her with the most painful secrets of his life. Elizabeth reads the letter, and then she reads it again, and as she reads, something inside her begins to crack. "Till this moment, I never knew myself." That is what she says, to herself, alone. She realizes, with awful clarity, that she has been just as blinded by prejudice as she ever accused Darcy of being blinded by pride. She believed Wickham immediately because she wanted to believe him. She dismissed Darcy's good qualities because she had decided to dislike him. Her impertinence, her sharp wit, her confidence in her own judgment had become a flaw she couldn't even see. This is Elizabeth Bennet's greatest moment, not when she falls in love, when she recognizes with full honesty that she was wrong. Section 10. Pemberley. The place that changes everything. Elizabeth leaves Rosings and returns home, but the letter has changed her. Darcy's image in her mind is transforming from villain to something more complex, more real. Then comes summer, and a trip north with her aunt and uncle, the Gardeners. Their tour takes them through Derbyshire. They find themselves near Pemberley, Darcy's estate. Elizabeth's aunt wants to visit. Elizabeth agrees, only because she's certain Darcy is away. He isn't. But before she sees him again, she sees Pemberley itself. And Pemberley is extraordinary. Not the ostentatious grandeur of Lady Catherine's Rosings, which announces wealth loudly and without grace. Pemberley is elegant, natural, tasteful. The grounds seem designed to show off the beauty of the landscape, rather than the power of the owner. The housekeeper, a woman who has known Darcy all his life, speaks of him with genuine affection. He is the best landlord, the best employer, the kindest master she has ever known. Elizabeth listens, and feels something she hadn't expected to feel. And then Darcy appears. He is not cold. He is not haughty. He is warm, welcoming, eager to please, to her and to her relatives from trade, whom he had once mentally looked down upon. She sees who he actually is, not the proud silhouette she had painted from a distance, but a real man, humbled, trying, changed. And something in her heart quietly, irrevocably, shifts. The next section contains the crisis that will test everything and reveal who Darcy truly is. Section 11. Lydia's elopement. The disaster that destroys everything. Then the letter arrives. Lydia, the youngest, most reckless, most poorly supervised of the Bennet sisters, has run away with Wickham. Not to marry, just run away. In 1811, this is catastrophic, not just for Lydia, but for all 5 sisters. A family scandal of this kind could destroy every other daughter's chance of a respectable marriage. Society was merciless about this. The shame of one would be the shame of all. Elizabeth and the Gardiners rush back to Longbourn. The family is in chaos. Mr. Bennet disappears to London to try to find them. Mrs. Bennet takes to her bed, alternating between drama and self-pity. Elizabeth, in her anguish, says something she doesn't intend to say. She says it to Darcy, who appears unexpectedly, just as she receives the news. And as she tells him what's happened, in that unguarded moment she realizes she is desperately sorry she cannot have him, that her family's disgrace makes it impossible now, that she has wasted her chance through Pride and Prejudice and the manipulations of a man like Wickham. Darcy's nemesis, now her family's ruin. She thinks it is over. She is wrong again. Section 12. Darcy's secret. The greatest act of love in the story. Here is what Elizabeth doesn't know. While she was grieving at Longbourn, while her father was searching fruitlessly in London, while the family's hopes were collapsing, Mr. Darcy was also searching, not because he was asked to, not for recognition. He found Wickham and Lydia in a boarding house in London. He negotiated with Wickham, a man he despised, a man who had tried to destroy his sister, paid his considerable debts, bought him a commission in the army, and secured his agreement to marry Lydia. He did this in complete secrecy. He did this entirely, as he will later admit, for Elizabeth. Think about what that means. This is a man whose pride was his defining characteristic, who valued his dignity above almost everything, who found the Bennet family embarrassing, the mother ridiculous, the younger sisters mortifying, and he went quietly, humbly, and fixed the mess, not to be thanked, not to win anyone over, simply because the woman he loved was suffering. That's not just romance. That's character. That's who someone actually is when no one is watching. Section 13. Lady Catherine strikes and accidentally saves everything. Word begins to spread that Elizabeth Bennet might be engaged to Mr. Darcy. Lady Catherine de Bourgh is not pleased. She drives all the way from Rosings, in high dudgeon, to confront Elizabeth and demand she promise never to marry her nephew. What follows is one of the most satisfying scenes in English literature, because Elizabeth refuses, completely, gracefully, brilliantly. She doesn't rage or cry or collapse. She simply looks at Lady Catherine, this woman of enormous wealth, enormous social power, enormous presumption, and says calmly that she will make no such promise. In marrying your nephew, Elizabeth says, I should not consider myself as quitting that sphere. He is a gentleman. I am a gentleman's daughter. So far we are equal. Lady Catherine is furious. She storms off. She goes straight to Darcy to tell him about it. And here is the delicious irony. By telling Darcy how Elizabeth refused to promise she wouldn't marry him, Lady Catherine inadvertently tells Darcy exactly what he needed to hear. Elizabeth hadn't promised to refuse him. Elizabeth had told the most fearsome woman in his social world to mind her own business. That could only mean one thing. Section 14. The second proposal. Everything changes. Darcy comes to Longbourn. He and Elizabeth walk together, and with a courage that costs him everything, he tells her, My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever. And Elizabeth, who has spent months processing, grieving, growing, becoming, tells him yes. She tells him her feelings have changed so completely that she barely recognizes the woman who refused him at Hunsford. They walk for miles without knowing it. They are too busy talking, laughing, understanding each other at last. And when he explains why he behaved so badly early on, that he had been raised to be selfish, that his parents had allowed him to think well of himself without requiring him to think well of others, he says something extraordinary. What debt do I not owe you? You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you I was properly humbled. He isn't resentful, he's grateful. He had the pride of a man certain of his own worth, and Elizabeth, through honesty, through refusing to flatter him, through seeing him clearly, cracked it open and found something better underneath. Have you ever had someone love you honestly enough to tell you the truth? Comment below, because that kind of love is rare. Section 15. The Bennet family reacts. Pure comedy, of course. Telling the Bennet family about the engagement is its own adventure. Mr. Bennet, who teases Elizabeth about Darcy with the affectionate assumption that she must despise him, is genuinely bewildered. Are you out of your senses? He asks her. Have you not always hated him? And when Elizabeth finally convinces him her feelings are real, he says something characteristically perfect. He is the kind of man, indeed, to whom I should never dare refuse anything. I could not have parted with you, my Lizzie, to anyone less worthy. Bennet's reaction is perhaps the funniest in the novel. She, who had once called Darcy disagreeable and horrid, goes completely to pieces with delight. 10,000 a year, Lord, what will become of me? I shall go distracted. Jane, dear, wonderful Jane, is so genuinely astonished at her sister's engagement that she cannot quite believe it. I know how much you dislike him, she says. Elizabeth laughs. You know nothing of the matter. And soon Jane and Bingley are also engaged, their reunion quietly arranged by Darcy, who admitted to Bingley his interference and was forgiven. 2 love stories, 2 happy endings, both earned. Section 16. What the story really taught us. Self-knowledge is the hardest work. Let's pause here, because this novel is about so much more than love. It's about the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are. Elizabeth believed she was an excellent judge of character. She was smart, observant, proud of her ability to see through pretense, and she was, mostly. But her confidence in her own perception became its own kind of blindness. Darcy believed he was a good man with understandable flaws. He was, mostly. But his certainty about his own worth made him contemptuous and cold to people he hadn't bothered to truly know. Both of them had to be broken open before they could see clearly. Darcy by Elizabeth's refusal, Elizabeth by Darcy's letter. The moment Elizabeth says, "Till this moment, I never knew myself." That's the real climax of this novel. Not the proposal, not the wedding, the moment of genuine, painful self-knowledge. Austen is telling us something timeless. The most important work any of us will ever do is the work of knowing ourselves honestly, without defense. Without the flattering stories we tell ourselves about why we're right and everyone else is wrong. Pride doesn't protect us. Prejudice doesn't protect us. They just blind us to the truth. Section 17. What happened to everyone else? The final accounting before we close. Let's finish the story. Jane and Bingley moved to an estate in the same county as Darcy's Pemberley, close enough for the sisters to see each other constantly. Their marriage is warm, gentle, and mutually devoted. They are perhaps not the most passionate couple, but they are profoundly good for each other. Charlotte Collins, practical Charlotte, manages her household, her pompous husband, and her proximity to Lady Catherine with calm efficiency. She chose security over love, with open eyes. Austen respects her for the choice, even while showing us its limitations. Lydia and Wickham, they move restlessly from town to town, forever in debt, forever spending more than they have. Wickham's affection for Lydia fades quickly. Hers lasts a little longer. They are, as Elizabeth predicted, neither happy nor particularly miserable, just reckless and irresponsible, and a minor, persistent drain on everyone around them. Lady Catherine, furious at Darcy's marriage to Elizabeth, eventually relents. Her curiosity about how a woman of Elizabeth's background would conduct herself at Pemberley, proving stronger than her indignation. And Mr. Bennet, the man who stayed in his library reading and laughing while the world crumbled and rebuilt around him, he is regularly found at Pemberley, especially when least expected. He missed Elizabeth more than anyone. Section 18. Jane Austen's genius. What she was really doing here is what makes Jane Austen a genius. She wrote Pride and Prejudice in an age when women couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't attend university, and were almost entirely dependent on the men in their lives for survival. She wrote about the narrow world of drawing rooms and country balls and formal calls, and in that small canvas, she painted the entire human condition. The pressure Mrs. Bennet is under to marry off her daughters is not merely comic. It is the pressure of survival. If you read the novel knowing that, every one of Mrs. Bennet schemes and panics takes on a different, sadder dimension. Charlotte Lucas isn't just a cautionary tale. She's a woman making a difficult, reasonable choice in an unreasonable world. And Elizabeth Bennet, bold, brilliant Elizabeth, who refuses Mr. Collins when she could have saved her family, who refuses Darcy when she could have saved herself, is one of the most radical heroines in literary history. Not because she fights or protests or rebels openly, but because she insists on marrying for love and respect, in a world that gave her almost every incentive to do otherwise. Austen never preached. She never lectured. She just watched and recorded and trusted her readers to understand. Section 19. The lessons that last. What to take away from this story. What can we carry with us from Pride and Prejudice? First impressions are powerful, but they are not the truth. Darcy seemed cold and arrogant. He was. But underneath that was a man of deep integrity and hidden warmth. Wickham seemed charming and sympathetic. He was. But underneath that was dishonesty and self-interest. The surface isn't the story. Second, confidence in your own judgment is not the same as wisdom. Elizabeth was smart. She was also wrong. The most dangerous bias is the one you can't see in yourself, because your own intelligence is disguising it. Third, real love asks you to grow. Darcy didn't just win Elizabeth, he became worthy of her. She didn't just forgive him. She became honest enough to acknowledge her own mistakes. Their love is the product of two people changing, not just meeting. Fourth, economic reality is not the enemy of romance, but it shouldn't be the whole story either. Austen shows us both. She doesn't mock Charlotte for being practical. She also doesn't let us forget that Elizabeth's choice required extraordinary courage. And finally, the most important relationship you will ever have is with your own honest self. Not the self you present to the world, not the self you'd like to be, the one who occasionally misjudges people, acts out of pride, lets prejudice do the work of thought. That's the self Austen asks us to examine, with humor, with compassion, with a great deal of tea. Section 20. Conclusion and call to action in the end. Pride and Prejudice is a love story, but it's not a story about finding a perfect person. It's a story about becoming a better one. Darcy had to learn humility. Elizabeth had to learn honesty. Both of them had to stop seeing the world through the comfortable filters of what they expected and start seeing clearly. And when they finally did, when they were both stripped of their pride and their prejudice, what they found was each other. Imperfect, remarkable, fully known, and fully chosen. 200 years later, that is still the dream. Not a prince on a white horse, not a perfect romance untouched by conflict, but two people who are honest enough to know themselves, humble enough to grow, and brave enough to choose love even when it's complicated. Elizabeth Bennet is still one of us. Every person who has ever trusted their own judgment too much, been humbled by the truth, and come out on the other side with a little more wisdom and a little less certainty. And Mr. Darcy, well, he's still the man who quietly, secretly, without any credit, moved mountains for the woman he loved, and said nothing about it. If you made it to the end of this summary, we'd love to know, which character resonated most with you? Elizabeth's wit? Darcy's hidden depth? Charlotte's pragmatism? Mr. Bennet's ironic detachment? Comment below, and tell us, which book should we cover next? If this audiobook summary moved you, made you think, or made you want to pick up the original novel, please share it with someone who needs it. Every great book deserves to find new readers. And from all of us, thank you for listening.